The Confessional is brought to you by LOCKEROOM, the groundbreaking fan engagement platform turning your physical touchpoints into digital access points. With a simple scan of QR codes or tap on NFC-enabled merchandise, your once anonymous followers become active members with verified fan IDs across your whole ecosystem. Connect fans globally through matchday rituals, vibrant communities, exclusive content and experiences, rewards, digital memories, and much more. Own the relationship, own the data, compound fan value, and unlock direct revenue streams from your biggest supporters. Find out more at www.lockeroom.app. And now, on with the show.
I'm Roger Mitchell, and this is The Confessional. Today we've got one of the most interesting and unique people you could ever come across. Ex-professional footballer Ray Ranson of the late 70s and 80s, Man City, England under-21 captain, a very, very strong career, but I'm sure we'll come on to how maybe that could have gone differently in one way or the other. After his career, he became one of the very first people, I would say, and that's interesting that it's an athlete that did this, to bring risk capital into sport and football in an innovative way, and was very successful in that. He later, again, took hedge fund capital to buy Coventry City, and I'm sure you'll be delighted that they're now back in the Premiership. He nearly also bought my favourite club, Glasgow Rangers, but we won't speak about that too much. and we met probably just over 20 years ago, maybe 25 now, when I found myself as chief executive of a listed company called Trading Sports PLC on the AIM market in London. And he had just taken a very large stake in that company, and our paths crossed from that moment. So an exceptionally interesting person in the confessional today. Ray Ranson, welcome.
Thank you, Roger. No pressure then.
No pressure at all. You're used to pressure. You're used to pressure. So listen, the way we do this is we've got these 6 questions and then we just bounce off them a little bit depending on what your answers are. I don't know what your answers are going to be, but you know the 6 questions. So here's question 1, Ray. For what and to whom do you need to ask forgiveness?
Well, as you've very kindly outlined, I had a half-decent football career. And since then, I've been heavily involved in sports finance and business. So as you can imagine, I'd probably done and said numerous things that I shouldn't have. But I've had a little think about this one. And as I say, for all the things that I may have said to people that upset them or did things or whatever, the one thing that I really, really regret is very insignificant to most people, but it happened at Newcastle United's training ground, where we were having a practice match and a player that nobody will have heard of called Billy Askew. We got into a bit of a scuffle, which at 8 and 9 must have been 30 odd years of age then, maybe, probably 30, 31, 32. Roy Aitken was there, Mark McGee, which I could spend all day talking about those 2 characters, as you can imagine. And I got into a bit of a scuffle with Billy, which I'd never done in my whole career before. And then about 10 minutes later, I got the opportunity to leave something on him, and I did, and I regret it to this day because he was stretchered off the training ground. His shin was like gaping open. I didn't break anything, but sadly he ended up in hospital with a infection or whatever, and very silly looking back. Never met him since because he just disappeared, and it more or less ended his career. So I look back, and as I say, I've done and said a lot of things, but I've never really hurt anybody apart from that, and I regret it. But just one of those mad moments that I'd never been in a tussle with any of my teammates up until then. And as you say, north of the border, I lost the heat. And so sadly,
what did he say? What did he say?
No, it was a scuffle. Well, we had a bit of a practice match, and it got a bit heated and this, that and the other, all as practice matches do. They're a complete and utter waste of time when I look back in my career. And I was playing against him. I was, a few tackles flying in and this, that and the other. And he basically tried to, stick one on me. So there was a bit of a scuffle and all the lads separated us and whatever. But 10 minutes later, I got the opportunity. Yeah, and I regret it to this day. So if I ever did bump into him, I'd basically just beg his forgiveness and say, look, Billy, I'm really, really sorry what happened. It never happened before, never happened after. So yeah, just one of those moments that I look back and I weep and cringe about it. Something I'm not very proud of, but hey, it happened on the training ground, but it still sits in my my memory files. So,
well, you know what, Ray? I think most people answer this question and they say things about, "Oh, I moved my family around. I was never around. I was too busy doing that. Too busy." That's the best answer I think we've had so far. Genuine. I left something on him. He never played again.
Yeah, genuine remorse.
Remorse, proper remorse.
Yeah. He ended up, so picture the scene. Roy Aitken came round to my house in the afternoon and he said, "Ray, Billy's in hospital." And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, what have I done and whatever. So, yeah. So, bit left field for your viewers, but true story. And as I say, Jim Smith was the manager. He went absolutely ballistic at me. He didn't need much excuse, Jim Smith, because he was probably the most volatile manager ever sort of worked under. You've seen sort of Mike Bassett, England manager. Well, trust me, Jim Smith, he had nothing on Jim. And Jim laid into me, "You idiot, you'll never play for this club again," da-da-da-da. And in the meantime, Billy's lying on the floor with a 6-inch gash in his... I got the ball, by the way.
Of course.
But in those
what
days,
matters.
you could follow through, and I was 30-odd years of age, so I knew all the tricks in the trade. But I'd never done it before then and never did it after. So sorry, Billy. As I say, huge remorse.
Great answer. I'm going to ask you one that maybe take us in another direction. We're still on question 1, about forgiveness. My question to you, Ray, is, and we know each other for over 20 years, and we've been in the same rooms in certain moments that have been tense. How would you consider your level of ruthlessness in life and in business? On a scale of 1 to 10.
I would say 20 odd years ago, it was sort of a 2 or 3. Now it's 8, 9, 10. Yeah. I think over the years, because I've been more and more involved in business, football, 20 years, there's ways and means, and you fall out with managers and all sorts of things. But in business, it's cutthroat and ruthless. So over the years, I've probably got really tough and ruthless about things. That comes with impatience of getting a bit older, so I'm not as tolerant as I used to be. So, yeah, I would have thought during my football career, it was, maybe 3, 4, 5. Since then, it's in the, higher numbers. So, again, it's just part of life.
That surprises me. That surprises me a little bit, Ray, because I think we spend most of the direct time together 20 years ago, as I say, at Trading Sports. And I always had you down as a real hard nut, a very hard nut in business. You've got what? Remember, we always had this joke, Ray, take your game face off. Can we speak naturally to each other? You have got one hell of a game face. And do you think that came from having been in sport and you're in the tunnel and you look at the guy over to your right and you need to make sure you're not showing weakness? Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it comes with confidence on the other side of things. But you're right. I've had that thrown at me a few times. I always remember at Benfield, a few of the guys used to say to me, you'd never play poker. I've never played cards in my life, but they'd say you'd never play poker against you because you never know what you're thinking or whatever. But I think that hasn't changed, but I think I'm more ruthless on my action of that. So I have got this sort of exposure still, but I act on it a lot more ruthlessly than what I used to.
Geez, well, that is interesting. Listen, let's go on to question 2, and this is going to be quite a wide one, I think. What's the deal you wish you hadn't done?
Prosum. So I, as you know, because you were involved in it, I bought I was involved in the takeover of Prozone, and it was a nightmare. I, again, didn't do any due diligence, relied on other people, young, naive, left Benfield, did very well, cashed my chips in there, which I can come back to. But saw an opportunity. Prozone then was, as you know, revolutionized how, data and tracking players every tenth of the second. So but it's the deal I most regret doing because I didn't have control over it, and I was told it would cost £1 million and probably take 18 months to turn around. Well, 4 years later and £4 million later, it just started breaking even. So it was very stressful, cost me a huge, from cash flow point of view, tied up cash, so I could have gone elsewhere and done elsewhere. That's the one deal, because it's one of the, I haven't done many. And by the way, since then, I vowed I'd never buy another business again, and I haven't. I just backed myself, or again, we can come on to technology, I backed myself. I would never, ever, ever buy another business, ever. And I've never done since.
Let's focus on this one, because that business you're talking about is a sport tech business. That's the category it's called now. And at that moment in time, Ray, I would suggest it was maybe the very first sport tech business. It was something revolutionary, taking the game in a new direction. It had first mover advantage. It had the brand. It had the traction with clubs all over Europe. And yet. Now, people have listened to these podcasts know that I've got a view about sport tech now as a B2B thing, trying to sell into the clubs and the leagues and the franchises, everything like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's a long time ago. One of the problems at Prozone is it didn't have any pricing power, even though... Talk about that, Ray.
That was the thing. We used to, all the salespeople, we used to, beg for like £100,000 a season. This is tracking every player, every game, every tenth of a second. They wouldn't think twice about paying a player 50 grand or paying 50 million quid for a player. But boy, would they, argue about this, that and the other. And we do, it's this. So there was no pricing power. Yeah, it should have been. You look at high frequency trading and data and analytics and now in finance, Prozone revolutionized the game, but the clubs just didn't get it and didn't know how to use it and everything like that. So it was just a race to the bottom on price. The cost was going up, and you're right, everybody, Man United and used to, on a Saturday evening, you'd hear Wenger and Mourinho say, "Oh, well, I'll check the Prozone data on Monday," and this and the other. So the brand awareness and the contacts and the clients we had were unbelievable. It took 4 years to break even because of the data and analytics and the processing, which obviously everything in life. So I get Prozone's buried in the archives of, I think it's Stat Perform now. So I sold it to its biggest competitor, And then that was sold to Stats Inc. And then Stats Inc. was... So there's a sort of, so it was a bit like a boat. The happiest day, what is it that they say about a boat? The 2 happiest days of your life, The second happiest is when you buy it, and the happiest is when you sell it. Well, that was me. That was my boat. Prozone. When I bought it, I thought, hallelujah. By the way, I bought it for £1, and I knew that it was going to cost money, but I didn't realise it was going to cost over 4 million quid and take 4 years to turn around. So it tied up a lot of cash, a lot of time and effort. So that was my boat moment in that I thought, great, and I can basically build around Prozone for data and analytics and stuff like that. But I got it massively wrong. Well, you did. Well, I don't think you did get it massively wrong, Ray, because as a vision, I remember those days. It wasn't just about the tracking data. You had a vision for Prozone, what else you were going to bolt onto it. I mean, what Catapult has done, and all of them did what you told me you were going to do when we looked at about 2003. But Prozone should have been a Genius or a Sport Radar. That's what it was. That was the pioneer. It should have been a $3, $4, $5 billion company on NASDAQ. And instead, all I had to do every month, it was like 100 grand here and funding it and the development and whatever. And you're right, there was no pricing power or anything, but Prozone was the generic term, and just a brand alone. Because as I say, we used to have Arsene Wenger and Sam Allardyce going on to Sky Sports on, at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night saying Prozone this and Prozone that. Yet, don't get me wrong, I got all my money back and made a little bit of profit, but it should have been a multi-billion pound business. It should have been. I think that episode coloured us a little bit for the rest of our outlook on B2B sport tech. But anyway, listen, I've got another thing I want to ask you about, still on question 2. When you look back now on the promotion of Coventry this year and everything that you went through with Caesar, the hedge fund, is that a deal that you're happy you did? Do you look back with it with fondness? Very mixed. I'm delighted that where they are. When I left in 2011, when we took over in 2007, Coventry City was £40 million in debt. A championship club in 2007. It is just when you think back. Bust. 40 million. Yeah. The inland revenue was 6 million, and Co-op 20 million, and Jeffrey Richmond, the MP. So I take great comfort. And by the way, the squad was worthless. We had to pay players to leave. And when I left in 2011, we didn't even have an overdraft, Rog. Yeah, and basically it was funded from all the player sales that I developed, which wasn't the business model. So very mixed. Met some wonderful people there. Gary Hoffman, who I'm still friendly to this day. Now that's the Gary Hoffman was vice chairman of Barclays Bank, Visa. He's now chairman of Monzo. He was chairman of the Premier League. He's still friendly with me to this day. So that says a lot for me because he is a die-hard Coventry City fan. And if I hadn't come out of there smelling a rot, he wouldn't, but we're still friendly to this day, which gives me great comfort at the job I did. Because if it wasn't for their support, there might not have been a Coventry today. Because it was a constant battle with Sisu. And again, the reason why I highlight you, and it's not me bragging, go Google it. Track from when I left and me, Gary and Joe left in early 2011, and you'll see the descent all the way down to playing at Northampton and playing at Birmingham and ended up to whatever. Why? Because there was nobody to challenge them. They talk about handing the keys back, the assigning to the lunatics. Well, that was it. So there was nobody to challenge them, and the club just went into free fall for years and years and years. And so I'm delighted that they're back. Fantastic. The fans are fantastic. They're very loyal. but mixed emotions, as you can imagine, because it was a, you know, I always say to people, I spent more time managing Sisu than I did the football club.
Yeah. And let's take that point further, because Sisu is what you would call cold, big finance, hedge fund. When you see so much of that kind of money coming into soccer now, football, do you wince, Ray? Do you say, I know how this is going to end? I've seen this film. I'm not going to put any names on that, but there's so many examples out there now of big finance getting involved in football clubs, and maybe some of these clubs don't have the people like you and Hoffman that they could, let's say, protect them from the excesses from the big financiers.
I don't wince because, again, I am speaking to you, so you can back me up on this. I was forecasting this 20 years ago when people were saying, "Oh, the bubble's going to burst, the Premier League and this, that, and where that," and I'm saying it's only getting bigger. It's only getting bigger. Wait, the TV rights and mobile phones and streaming, and watch when Amazon come in. This was 20 years ago, and when all these. Social media, and we used to talk at length about the opportunity, and it's just grown and grown, and it will continue to grow. But as Alan Sugar once coined the phrase many, many years ago, it's the prune juice effect. It goes in at the top and goes straight through. I.e., the money, no matter how much money you earn, it goes to the players. It goes on transfer fees and wages. And if you don't know what you're doing, you will get your trousers taken down, which most people do because they think it's easy. Oh, it's running a football club and whatever. Bernie Ecclestone used to talk about Formula One as the piranha club. Try going into football with the transfer market and whatever. At least in Formula One, you've only got 10 teams. So it is ruthless with agents and players, and there's no loyalty. It is a ruthless. It took me months to get over Cov, being at Coventry, because I used to get phone calls at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night to say, one of your players has been arrested in a nightclub in Southampton. I'm thinking, what's he doing there? Yeah. So it was, great experience. Missed the day-to-day, because I loved it, I
did love it.
You
did love it.
I did love it, and that day to day, because I always used to say I was in the commodity business, a bit like Guy Hans when he bought, the
EMI,
what was the cinema he bought? Whatever. He bought a load of cinema. You've heard the story where he bought a load of cinemas.
Yeah, Odeon, I think it was.
And he sat everybody down. He said, "Let me just tell you, we're not in the film business. We're in the popcorn industry."
These are the great sayings.
Because
they don't teach you this in business school.
Yeah, get them sat down and fill the faces full of popcorn. That's where we make our margin. And it's like I always, tell the story about Mike Ashley. You bump it to my Mike. Sorry for digressing. Pull me back.
No, this is what it's all about.
All right.
Keep going.
Mike Ashley. If you bump into Mike Ashley and you don't know who he is, and you say to him, "So, Mike, what do you do? What do you think his answer is?" It's not a trick question. What do you do? What do you do, Mike? I'll tell you. He says, "I sell socks." And they go, "Oh, really? That's really interesting," and whatever. What he means is, when you go to a Sport Direct and you're at checkout, what's sitting there looking at you? 5 pair of socks for $1.99. Sports Direct is the second biggest seller of socks in the UK behind M&S. Fact.
Yeah.
So I'm
it's like the supermarkets at the checkout. No, you're not digressing.
So getting back to I was in the commodity trading business, and I used to, my favourite saying in football, there are 3 things you need in football to be good at: recruitment, and recruitment. Forget all the fluff on the outside about bums on seats and this and that. Unless you get that product right,
that's so
and
true,
you
Ray.
know what you're
It's
doing
so
with it. And that's where people fall down. They try and squeeze an extra tenner out of him, or more corporate hospitality, or sell more programs. It doesn't even touch the salaries.
It does, and it's all on the player side. You get it, and anyway, you know this is your confessional. But on this, right, so recruitment, and I have to say this because you as an owner or a chairman or a CEO, you were all three at Coventry.
I was chief bottle washer at Cov.
Yeah, you were everything. But you've got other people on that recruitment thing you said, which in this case at that time, maybe it's even more complex now with directors of football, at that time was your coach. Tell us your experience of you trying to run a business like people are understanding your head works now, where you've got inverted commas, football people, old football managers thinking they don't need to speak to you, that they can ignore you, that they can bring in who they want. Give us a flavour of what you saw in that world. So you can throw in the names of some managers if you want, or leave them anonymous, but give us an idea of the nonsense that goes on.
Oh, you wouldn't get your breath at some of the things I saw in the 3.5 years at Cov, and one of the biggest regrets I had is not moving to the training ground. I was a bit old school, let them, I don't need to go to the training ground and all this and whatever. Whereas at the first, if I was ever daft enough to do it again, I'll move myself to the training ground. But I'll just tell you, because this will all be in the book, and I don't mind. So I can talk you through in the first month. We took over Coventry on I think it was the 14th of December 2007, and I hadn't met the manager till then, and that was Ian Dowie, who was built up as up and coming manager and young and into sports science and this, that, and the other. Nightmare. I mean, you wouldn't. Some of the stories I can tell you about it are just incredible. But one. And I don't mind telling you this one. So after about a couple of weeks, I said to him, look, we're coming into the January transfer window. I've been at Cov 2 weeks. I said, put a list together for me, the players we've got, and then the players you would like to, target and whatever, with a bit of a description and whatever, and we'll go through them. So, right, and this is, I'm still owner of Prozone at the time, so I know the type of data you can get and where it's all going and this, that, and the other. And I've been in business, I've retired in 95, so we're talking 10 years. This is 2007, 2008. So I've been around the block. And so he comes to my house in Cheshire because he lived in Bolton. And he comes in and we go into the lounge and a white cup of tea or whatever. And he hands me 2 pieces of paper, right? And I look at one and it's got the names of the players with a brief sentence next to it, the current squad. Michael Misford, he is our striker. Right? True, right? So it was a one-line description, like this. That's the players. And then the other one, which was even better, he put on an A4 piece of paper, sort of in position, so goalkeeper, and then there was like 4 names underneath it. And then it writes, so like in a 4-4-2 formation with half a dozen names. So I'm looking at this one sheet of paper. But next to each name, in brackets, is 0000001 00002. So out of you've got 10. Let's say you had 11 positions, and let's say there was 4 or 5 for each one. So it's, fair amount of names. 90% of it was zeros. And I'm sat there with this one piece of paper. So this is the whole scout. This is what we're going to spend the millions of pounds we And I'm looking at it, I thought, sod it. I'm going to ask the question. I don't care how stupid I look. I said, Ian, and pardon my ignorance, what are the numbers in the brackets for? And he said, that's how many times we've seen them play. So I'm sat there with 20 million quid transfer kitty in my back pocket.
I've never seen them. I've never even seen them.
And 50 of the players that he wants me to buy are in brackets at 0. And then there was 4 or 5 at 1 and 2 at 2. And that's where all the money was going to go. Needless to say, and it just went on and on and on. And I had a month of it, and so we sacked him in the February. Big mistake, though. I should not have done it. I should have waited till the end of the season. So that was my biggest mistake at Cov, was getting rid of him. But I couldn't take it any longer. It was like 4 weeks of purgatory. And he was on the phone.
And you're ruthless. Remember, you're ruthless.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you say.
Yeah.
You didn't like it and you said, "Call."
Yeah. So you'll, well, as soon as you goaded me into it, so he doesn't know. I meet him on the Sunday night as part of the, you're getting sacked in the morning one. I meet him on the Sunday night because he lives up in, up there. And I said, look, it's not going well, is it? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What's this? What's that? Just, getting all the answers from a disciplinary hearing point of view. I then come back and I ring a couple of the board members, say, nothing's going to change, this, that, and the other. So Monday morning, I'm up at 5 o'clock, suited and booted, and I drive to Cov. And I'm first at the training ground, and I'm sat in his office, not in his seat, in his office, across from the desk. And I see the car coming down the drive, because he used to get there, 8 o'clock or whatever. I've been sat there, I've had 3 cups of tea already waiting, and he comes in, and his face, because I'm sat in his office, I said, you need to sit down here. And I said, right, I spoke to the board. I said, we're going to make a change, blah, 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 blah. So I forgot about this. So he says to me, so people are going to think I'm ruthless. He said to me, well, I said, so, pack your stuff and, see you later, so to speak. And he said, well, I'd like to stay behind. I'd like to stay and say goodbye to my players. I said, well, let me get one thing straight, Ian. They're not your players, right? They're the club's players. And if you're not off these premises by 9 o'clock, I'm going to phone the police because you've been sacked. Needless to say, he was gone by 8:30. So yes, I am ruthless.
Was there not one incident where, I think it was with the same guy, where he was going to do you a favour and talk you through the tactics that he was going to deploy on the Saturday to turn things around?
No. So this is part of the 30-day purgatory, yeah? So the first game, right, was away. Again, Google it. That's another thing about football. You can back it all up because it's in the book. So the first game was away to Blackpool, and we got thumped 4-0, right? So I'm thinking, what have I done? Yeah. So I still haven't met it yet, by the way, because he wouldn't come and see me, because he was, you come and see me. You're, I'm me and Doughty, yeah? So, and he's probably listening to this sometimes, so he gets told about it, but it's all true, so I'm not, Anyway, so he phoned me on the Friday night, and the following Friday, and he said, we're playing whoever it was tomorrow, and I'm playing this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Ian, so I'm now in charge 7 days, yeah? And I said, Ian, do me a favour, don't be ringing me on a Friday night. I said, at 3:10 tomorrow, or 3:05, I'll be able to tell you what you're doing and how you're doing it, and what their formation is or whatever. So I'm not the chairman who dines out on a Friday night and, on this is what the team is tomorrow or whatever. You crack on with your job. Don't ring me on a Friday night or whatever. Needless to say, never ring me again. So yeah, that was
excellent,
interesting. Yeah.
Well, people will be really enjoying this wonderful edition of the Confessional. This is wonderful because I know all these stories and I just want to share them. And here's the third question that I know I think what you're going to say, but the story is so illuminating about you. Who's the person you wish you'd never met?
And now I think I know what I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say him. But so right. You think it's Billy McNeil, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%, yes.
It's not, actually. When I look back, I was 21, 22, something like that. And, I did a few things wrong, so I'll take some of the blame. But, yeah, Billy McNeil came in and got relegated from Man City, and there was, top-class young players, Nicky Reed, Tommy Kate and Steve McKenzie, and we were all for, as quicker he could get us out, the better. And, he treated us very shabbily. You can't do it these days. But it's not Billy McNeil. It's actually, because I've thought about it since we spoke, it's actually Nigel Dougherty. Nigel Dougherty was sadly no longer with us. He was the chairman of Notts Forest. I was at Benfield. We did a number of financing deals for Forest. And when I left Benfield, he enticed me into Dougherty Hanson and tried to set us up with Mark Corbridge.
That's a venture capitalist, right?
Correct. And promised me the earth and whatever. And things didn't go too well. And yeah, he made my life a misery for a couple of years in litigation and everything. And I went through all that, cost me an absolute fortune. And it ended up being settled on the courtroom steps, basically. So he basically knew he didn't have a case, but I think Dougherty Hanson spent several £1 million, and I spent a lot of money with Herbert Smith. And he knew he didn't have a case, but he just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And we want this information. And he had me followed, everything. And literally the trial was about to start. 12 o'clock, we were down in London at the Old Bailey, and basically the lawyer came and said, drop hands, you pay your fees, we'll pay ours. And that was it, walked away. But he made my life a misery for 2 years. And then ironically, this is a ruthless streak in me. So I'm now chairman of Coventry. We play Notts Forest, and Nigel's in the Caribbean somewhere. And I get a message to say, can Nigel beam the game or something over to the Caribbean? So you know what my response was.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Nigel Dougherty is one person I wish I'd never met because he put me through hell, me and my family. But yeah, I thought you were going to say Billy McNeil, but I did. When I look back, I take some of the blame because I was, a bit of a cocky sort, and
Well, listen, but it's not cocky, is it? It's not cocky. You're a stubborn old so and so, aren't you? It's the same on. You are, Ray, because we'll come on to Billy McNeil in a minute, but you don't take any nonsense from anybody, and if you think you're in the right, you'll dig your heels in, and right. So let's talk about Billy McNeil, and let's talk about where the world was at this moment in time. And correct me any time I'm wrong on this. Mr. Ray Ranson is the up-and-coming right back in English football. You've broken into a wonderful Man City team under Malcolm Allison. You're clearly seen as the next big thing, and certainly in that position. If I'm not mistaken, you're the under-21 captain of England. You've got no competition in that role that I could see. I looked around. I mean, you fell out with Billy McNeil, whether you were right or you're wrong or his fault, your fault. The fact is, you stuck to your guns. He puts you in the reserves, kills your career for a couple of years, and England right back for the next decade is Mike Duxbury. That's the way it went, Ray. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're absolutely spot on. If you look back, I made my debut against that great Nottingham Forest side. Brian Clough was paralytic drunk on the touchline on the 23rd of December 1978. So that I'll come on to Billy. So that, but if you look at the Forest team, Shilton, Viv Anderson, Frank Clark, Larry Lloyd, Kenny Burns, McGovern, Gemmell, the great John Robertson, that best player I played against, and Martin O'Neill and Berthels and Woodcock, and that's the team I made my debut against, and we drew no score, so I must have done something right. But you're right, I got into this team, I was, sort of destined England schoolboy, England youth. I was in the reserves when I was still at school. I was I got into first team at 18, and then it was onwards and upwards, got into the under 21s, captain of England under 21s. When we actually went to Hampden, another story, and beat Scotland. I played against, there were some good players, Gillespie or whatever. But as you know, my mother's from Stranraer, so I needed about 300 tickets. And I'm captain of England under 21s in Glasgow at Hampden Park, when half the stand was full of the Macmillan clan from Stranraer. So, well, you're right. So I was destined, and, it was onwards and upwards. But we fell off a cliff at Man City. I mean, we had a terrible run. Club was in financial difficulties, and we got beat in the famous last game of the season when David Pleat comes on the ground. So the club was in dire straits. We had to sell Trevor Francis and all that. 2 years earlier, we were playing in one of the best FA Cup finals ever against Tottenham. So the club went in free fall. It was incredible how it imploded. And we ended up in what was then the first division. And in comes Billy McNeil. And it was like a whirlwind. And all the young players were out. He brought in some of his own players. And I wish you mentioned about reserves. I wish I'd have been dropped to the reserves, Rog. I got put in with the kids of the U team. I was going in a minibus to Tranmere on a Tuesday night. When I was 2 years old, I'd been in the playing at Wembley and England under 21 captain. I mean, that's how far I fell. And but thankfully, I got rescued by Ron Saunders, who was then Birmingham manager, but at Aston Villa, and that great Aston Villa side that he put together, Ron Saunders tried to buy me from Man City. So he always stuck in his mind. But you're right, I was carving out, because, I was playing wing back. I always say I was playing wing back 30 years ago, forward and getting forward. You look at, crossing the ball and getting so... I always say the first two things I used to negotiate in the contract was no tackling and no heading. So, so you're right. But then I say Billy McNeil came in, and we were all for the chop, all the young players, and it was basically a revolving door. Who was next? And I went to Birmingham City with Ron Saunders, and had 2 or 3 great years there.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned that FA Cup final. I'm going to mention a little anecdote that I remember. There was a time you and I were hanging out a lot together, and we were going to a lot of meetings with a lot of big banks, investment banks and everything like this. And all these investment bankers, or you'll know this better than me, but I saw enough of it. They always liked, oh yeah, Ray Ranson, you're the guy with Ricky Villa, aren't you? And they always made that with a wee kind of like, I didn't like that. It was disrespectful. And you just said to one of them, and how many fucking FA Cup finals have you played in?
That's right. That was the one. Yeah. Well, that was always my, depending on who it was, but my put down line was, and how many cup finals have you played in? So, that was my put down. And they used to...
difficult to try and raise money from those people after that's how the meeting has started.
Yeah. So how to get off on the wrong foot, but yeah.
The other person I thought you may have mentioned was the wonderful Terry Ramsden. You remember Terry?
Terry.
My God.
Incredible. I mean, is he still alive? I think he is.
I think he is. Every so often, for people that don't know, Terry Ramsden was one of the great betters on horse racing, became an owner. Crazy. There's a bag of frogs. You can see all the clips on YouTube about who Terry Ramsden is. Unbelievable character. And one day he appeared on the share register of the aforementioned Trading Sports PLC.
Yeah, publicly quoted company. And he came in like a tornado, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do this. And at one stage he talked about turning it into a porn site or something. And you and I looked at each other and said, time to leave.
Yeah, well, actually, that's why I thought you were. I'm glad you brought this up, because we didn't know who he was. We'd done a research about who he was, and it was just horrific. One of the most entertaining people you can ever meet, but it's not corporate governance. So he comes on and he calls this meeting that we don't know anything about, but he's important in the company now. And he calls this meeting and he got a whiteboard. And we're all there, Graham Twaddle's there, everybody's there. And he's got one sentence on that whiteboard. He says, "This is our new strategy, lads. Mucho techie brains."
That's the one. That's the infamous quote that you and I have used for the last 25 years. Mucho techie brains.
And then he did say, well, what we're going to do with those techie brains is do porn sites, and that's when we kind of get out.
Yeah, it was
right,
like,
okay, let's
it was
go
like
on.
Sports and entertainment, but the entertainment was a bit, yeah. Yeah, anyway, move on.
Question 4, what train do you think you missed or were late for in life?
I've thought about this one, and if I've got the question right, my biggest regret is Benfield. I should never have left Benfield. I don't know whether that is the right, for your question, but
explain to people what Benfield was.
So Benfield was basically. So go back. I started the sports insurance business before I finished playing, which was great. So by the time which I've got that's the next one with Kevin Keegan, retired business. I got offered loads of jobs, and then I had the good fortune of meeting Matthew Harden, who was then the owner of Chelsea, but he was the majority shareholder and chairman of a company called Benfield, which was what you call a catastrophe reinsurance broker. And what that means is basically all the big, Piper Alpha and Hurricanes and Twin Towers were all reinsured through Benfield. So, Lloyd's would insure it, but then, Twin Towers, $1 billion each, but we only want to take 20% of the risk, so they reinsure. Nobody ever thought for 1 minute or two would fall down. But so Benfield specialised in big ticket catastrophe reinsurance broking, and Matthew made an absolute fortune at it. So when I met Matthew, he was saying, and he knew about my background, and he wanted to develop a sports side to the business. I'd already got it, I had all the contacts, and he just gave me this golden credit card, as they say, because we were doing all sorts of big ticket stuff and innovative insurance deals like the sale and lease back. And, we were doing credit default swaps on footballers 5 years before, it blew up the global financial market, And we'd hedged the injury, we'd hedged the credit risk and whatever. And that was all Benfield and this, that, and the other. The only problem is when I joined Benfield in 97, there were 90 odd staff, and it was the most profitable privately owned company in Europe. When I left in 2002, 2003, when it had just floated, there was 2,500 staff. So it basically geared itself up. It bought a massive US broker and this and the other, and gave itself up flotation. Those guys were geniuses, John Coleman, the chairman, Graham Chilton, whose son is Max Chilton, who was in Formula One. So they were all sport mad. Matthew said, come and join us, and, this, that, and the other. And I built the sports division of Benfield up. However, when it floated and there was 2,500 staff and whatever, most of the sort of 90-odd that, from the early days, cast the chips in and moved on. And I should never have left. I should have stayed at Benfield and gone on to, bigger and better things. Why do I say that now? Because 20 years later, I'm actually getting back into it in a big way. And mainly because when I was insuring players and, at Benfield 25 years ago, they were on $5,000 a week and the British transfer record was 10 million quid. Well, academy players are on that now. So the risks are huge. It's very niche. Try insuring that Haaland for 200 million. Good luck. Yeah, you've got, it's all offshore, Bermuda, nothing illegal, but the conventional market just hasn't got the capacity, or, it's very niche and very selective, and, structuring and insurance links, and capital markets and all that sort of stuff. So I've got back into that, as you know, in a big way, and been working on it for the last sort of 4 or 5 years. But so I look back and say, and think that was I should never have left. That was a moment that I should have stayed where I was. But, I decided to leave for one reason or another.
Give people an idea of what you were doing, because I know what you're doing, but they don't. Use an example, whether it's Rio Ferdinand and Risdale. Give people an idea of how you were influencing the football industry in that moment in time.
Well, basically because obviously don't forget I was surrounded by very bright people who were, reinsuring British Airways fleets, and it was all very, So basically we come up with a solution to, it's like off-balance sheet financing using the insurance market, because the insurance companies can take risk on their balance sheet far cheaper than banks. So we basically put a banking product together with a, AA, AAA rated insurance product to hedge the credit risk. So basically we would let into football clubs with some weird and wonderful sort of structuring where we'd sell the player and lease it back, and all very creative, all legitimate. It's been banned since. Because you can't do certain things and whatever. So we used to do all that. So basically we would finance. So like you look at the Leeds thing, which probably got its most publicity, was all them players like Rio Ferdinand and Decor and Mark Viduka. We financed all them. Leeds didn't have a penny. So we financed all those players, and we laid the credit risk off in the insurance market. We hedged the injury risk, and were very creative and made a shed load of money out of it. And the next extension to that was then getting into investing in players, which became known as the dreaded third-party ownership, which is a horrendous name for it, but it got tagged at that, and that's where then the Prozone thing. When I left Benfield, looking at Prozone data, analytics, and being very creative on that investment side of things. So there was a natural progression of that. But what I should have done is stayed at Benfield and did it all within. Yes, it was a publicly quoted company, but I had the support of the board. It was a publicly quoted company, but it had lost its entrepreneurial feel when I joined. Matthew and all these, very entrepreneurial, 90-odd staff, and lunch at Benfield was from 11:30 till 4:30. So, and that sort of very team, spirit. So I fitted in quite well. Having lived in the dressing room for 20 years, and then obviously the culture I was brought up in sport was, win or lose, hit the booze. If you draw, have some more. That was the famous quote when we were than Bobby Moore. So I wish I'd never have left, because I think I'd have all the stuff I'm doing now. Yes, technology's moved on and the value of players and whatever, but I'd have been able to do that and build a phenomenal business within the Benfield environment. And I didn't. I left and I went off into fund management, and then I had Prozone and Coventry and stuff like that, which was exciting and very innovative. But in hindsight, I should have stayed where I was.
Yeah. Listen, well, a question, because you mentioned his name a couple of times, Matthew Harding, who one could say was the star of Chelsea rising up to the level it is today. Because I think a lot of people who listen to this won't realise that Chelsea in the 60s and 70s weren't as big a team as some others. I think Matthew was the star of them becoming everything that they are today. One question for you: how would Matthew Harding judge Todd Boehly?
I think he would be an admirer, because he's very entrepreneurial, certainly puts his money where his mouth is. Looking from the outside in, I know the guys at Eldridge. I've never met Todd, but it's just the classic coming in and you're not quite under, they don't have a transfer market in the US. It's all draft picks and whatever. It is the Piranha Club. You need to know what you're doing. And, I never criticize anybody who's had a go. And I think they had it, they spent a hell of a lot of money on, having average players, but he isn't the first and won't be the last. There's some good players in there, like Palmer, who they got out to Man City. But at the time, you'd have looked at that. He'd only played half a dozen games, come on in the odd Champions League, whatever, 45 million for Cole Palmer then. Was probably about right, but look at him now. So I would have thought at Matthew, because he loved that entrepreneurial, having a go, and when in my early days at Benfield, you'd have regular sort of managers and players coming and that they wanted to sign and sneak them in the back door and have a chat with them. They used to come to the Benfield office, not go to Stamford Bridge, but Matthew was a genius. I mean, just a tragedy, because he predicted the, I wouldn't say downfall, but he predicted what has happened to international football. He predicted that 30 years ago, where the money coming into the Premier League would just, and the international football would suddenly be, a byproduct. And, now players get, caps for fun. If you look at some of the, players in previous years, and, you look at Bobby Charlton, you look at the teams he, played against. I mean, there wasn't a bad team, it was France and Germany and Holland and Scotland.
Yeah.
And Scotland had great players. Got some good players now, before the Matt Midley clan come on to me. I think he would look upon Todd as he's had a go and he's backed, rather than penny pinching, because Matthew was a real entrepreneur.
That's a great answer. This one we may have already covered. If we have, just tell me. What sliding door do you think you were just in time for? The train that you just got on in time?
Well, it's probably the one I got off in time, the sliding door. So when I was at Newcastle, when Kevin Keegan, who, sad to hear the news yesterday about him, he lives like a couple of miles away from where I'm sitting. I see him in the village in Hale, a bit of coffee or whatever. So he offered me a coaching job at Newcastle. I was coming to the end of my career. I'd had a really bad injury, Achilles tendon rupture. I got back playing, and he pulled me to one side in pre-season. I'd spent the whole season, missed most of the RD list, because Jim Smith was the manager. He took me there, Aussie our dealers at 12 months. I never kicked a ball for Aussie because I'd ruptured my Achilles tendon. And then they brought in Kevin Keegan, and Kevin Keegan, I was literally on one leg, and he said, I need you to play. He hadn't got a clue who, he said, who's that over there? I said, that's Lee Clark, he'd be a good player. And who's that? And that's Stevie Watson. And all these players were coming through. And he said, well, I need you out there tomorrow, even if it's just to stand out there and, tell people where to go and whatever. He said, because he'd never, he wasn't a coach or anything like that. So I was heavily involved, and then he offered me a coaching job at Newcastle. He wanted me to be a first-team coach, help him with that, get changed in the dressing. But I was still a player. I was actually in the team. So, I said to him, well, how's that going to work, Kevin? I'm in the team, I'm helping you coach, this, that, and the other. I'm getting changed in the coach's dressing room. And his answer was, well, you're a bright lad. You don't run with the hares and the hounds. He said, you figure it out. And I said, well, so I thought about it, and I politely said to him a couple of days later, thanks for your offer, Kevin, but I've started a business, the sports insurance business. I was 33 then. I said, I was 32. I started a business. I've had a terrible injury. I just want to enjoy the last few years of my career and then go into business. I may as well have said I've been having an affair with your wife for 10 years because, again, I got the old... and I was thrown under a bus. So I went from first-team player to first-team potential coach, getting changed in the coaching room, to training with the kids on a rugby pitch at Dunham University within weeks.
You said something really interesting there, Ray. You said Kevin Keegan wasn't a coach. Now, I don't really particularly want to talk about Keegan, but Keegan became England manager. How do you see the role of coaches now? We've seen a season in the Premier League, so many have been sacked, whether they're the guy like Chelsea, Liam Rossignol, or whatever his name is, these modern type ones. You talked about the old school ones like Ian Dowie, Slot, all of this stuff. How do you see the role of the coach now in modern football and what they're required to do?
It is. There's the clues in the name. It's, in my opinion, it's a coach. Yes, and I used to do this. So, Chris Coleman was the manager of Coventry for 2.5 years. How many games do you think he went to watch during that whole time? He went to 2 games in 2.5 years. So, because I know. So me and Andy Thorne, who's a good judge of the player, bought all the players. Chris would say, I need a right back. We'd ask why. And I didn't need tell him. I didn't need tell him. I had no, but I'd never sign anybody that he didn't like. I'd say, this is who we're thinking about bringing in. What's your thoughts? Yeah, fine, and whatever. But Chris was a coach, so I think so it suited me, and we left. We signed Danny Fox for 200 grand, sold him to Celtic for 2 million. We sold Leon Besk for, I think, 400 grand from Southampton, sold him to Newcastle for 2 million. Scott Dan for 400 grand from Walsall, sold him to Birmingham for 6 million. Lucas Djukovic, it was just endless. And that was what was propping the club up. I'm digressing a little bit. So for me,
this is great.
For me, it is a coaching role, but never sign a player over the coach's head. What I used to do is say, here's 5 options. Give me your 1 to 5. Yeah. So he'd say, these are the first choice, second, third, fourth, fifth. Yeah. And I'd make sure I got the one I wanted in the 5. Yeah.
Of course. Listen, last question. What person do you owe most to in life, but you haven't told them enough?
I've thought about this one. I'm really struggling. I assume most people say parents and stuff like that.
Yes. And wives.
But yeah. So I would go, because it's very difficult. very difficult question to answer. I've met a lot of people who've helped me down the years, which I'm eternally grateful for. But I suppose, like everybody, you can't really go past your parents. But whilst I don't phone them up, and they're still living. So my mum's 87 and my dad's 90. So I don't ring them up and tell them I love them every day, but I look after them. I've been very fortunate to do that, and they've been unbelievably supportive. Picture the scene, the 10-year-old kid playing for his school when the rain's coming in sideways in St Helens, and there's two teachers, i.e. the PE teacher and the other team, and one parent. That was my dad. So he'd clock off work at 4 o'clock and come and watch me play for the school. And then obviously it's St Helens boys, Merseyside boys, England boy, whatever. So my dad has given me incredible support. Tough love, but I mean, but incredible support. Mum, this sort of, I've been very fortunate. They gave me a great start and supported me, and then I think I've been able to repay that in some way. So I was struggling with that one, Rog. But as I say, I suppose most people. But I've met a lot of people who been very generous towards me, not financially, but with the time and support. The guy, the guy who actually got me into business, a guy called John Wilson, and we're still friends to this day. He helped me set. He was a big Man City fan. He helped me set up the sports insurance brokerage platform when I was still playing. And that was the vehicle that I then took into Benfield when I finished playing. But I would, John, and I still see John, and we go out for lunch occasionally or whatever. But he gave, a massive step up and gave me a platform where I could then turn around to Kevin Keegan and say, thanks, Kevin, but I'm going to go down this route. And if I hadn't met John Wilson, but I'm still friendly with John Wilson, and he knows how thankful I am for all the things he's done for me and supporting me, and we're still friends to this day. So there's a few, but I suppose not many people get past the parents, and I'm in that camp. But I think I can look myself in the mirror in the morning, and I think I've been a decent son, shall we say.
Excellent. Listen, I'm not going to let you go without one last question, because one of the people that we both know, a certain Mr. Brian Philpotts, calls you the greatest judge of horseflesh the football world has ever seen. And Brian isn't somebody to throw compliments around. Right, so I'm going to ask you to give me 2 minutes to 5 minutes based on your expertise on football and coaches. What chance does England have in the World Cup, and why?
0. First of all, he's taking all the wrong players. Don't forget they're going to be playing in 100-degree heat. So it's pointless taking box-to-box midfield players. And I had Jordan Henderson at Coventry on loan. He's a fantastic lad. You'd love your daughter to marry him. He's had a great career and whatever. But you need, how he's not taking Harry Maguire, who has an impact in both boxes, is unbelievable. So I just think he's taking all the wrong players, and I know he's going down the old 66 route of team spirit and, whatever. But no team has won the World Cup without, a genius footballer or whatever. And we haven't got one, basically. And I think if we'd have taken players to, it's going to be set plays. there's going to be water breaks every 10 minutes, the heat and the humidity. It's not going to be, Anfield on a Tuesday night, crash bang wallop and whatever. The conditions and so I just think we've got zero chance. And we haven't got the players, even if he took all the right players, but the players he's taking, in my opinion, are not good enough. And it's going to be a lot of set plays. And you look at the game now, it takes 5 minutes to take a corner and throw in. The ball's in play less than 50% of the time. And it's getting worse. People used to laugh at Rory Delap and Stoke and whatever. Every single Premier League club has a throwing specialist, and it's just incredible. And they've got to do something, while I'm on the subject, they've got to do something, FIFA or UEFA or whatever, about the scrum in the box, because it's getting pathetic. Next season, you're going to have 20 players in the 6-yard box. It's just so. I think the only way to do it is say, right, you can only have three players each. So three opponents in the box. That means you're going to have 3 defenders and a goalkeeper. So there's going to be 7 people in the 6-yard box. And if anybody encroaches, it's a free kick or whatever when the ball's taken. Otherwise, next season, you're going to have 20 players in the 6-yard box. People are going to be looking at the Premier League and thinking they've tuned into NFL or rugby union. It's just killing the game. I digress a little bit, but
no, you don't digress.
That's where the game's
important stuff.
Where the game's going on set plays, and then if you look back, to Wimbledon, it's all set plays. Now everybody's doing the same. Everything. You speak to Andy Thorne, who came to Newcastle, big mate, and then I took him to Coventry. Great, I'm decent judge. He's a very good judge of a player. And but he used to, the stories he used to tell us about the set plays and fashioning. It was all set plays. Get it in the corner, throw-ins, free kick. Everybody knew where it was going. You look at the game now, and Pep's revolutionised it. But there's a lot of players, there's a lot of teams in the Premier League. Bowlers get the ball forward quickly, and it's changing dramatically, and it's set plays. They're all 6'2", like light heavyweight boxers can all run 100 meters in 10 seconds. There's no more Billy Bremners, and those days are over. Forget it.
And that's a shame, isn't it, Ray? It's a shame.
It is.
It is a shame. We won't go into the famous one of those players, the famous Asa Hartford story. I think I don't think we should do that. But I want to say thanks for coming into the confessional in such a generous way. We could have talked for another 4 hours, Ray, and sometimes we've done that when we've been on the road together. But this has been great. Thank you.
The pleasure's been mine, and I wish you every success of it, and keep in touch.
Of course. Take care, Ray.
Cheers, mate.
3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers. And don't say that to the Macmillan clan, though. You get into trouble.
No. I used to get in trouble for walking down the street with a green jumper on. So in Stranraer, what's that? So
absolutely.
Happy days when the boat used to come over from Larne. Happy days, mate. All right, keep in touch.
Take care, Ray. Thanks again. Really, really grateful. Bye-bye.